emotions can easily overpower everything else. It's easy to lose control of our emotions and do or say something that we'll regret later. So, how can we learn to better control our emotions in the situations that we face every day? I would suggest that we should look to Jesus Christ, the one who is our perfect example in all things. And in this video, we'll notice 3 specifically recorded emotional responses of our Lord: compassion, sorrow, and anger. And we'll see what we can learn from him. The first emotion that we can learn from our Lord that we'll think about is compassion. Some examples of Jesus when he was moved by compassion for others are as follows, and we'll see how he responded. When he taught the multitudes in Matthew chapter 9, he healed, he taught, and he preached to them. Another time when he saw a great multitude in Matthew 14, he healed them and he fed them. Yet another instance in Mark 6, he saw a great multitude and he taught and he fed them. Another time he was with the multitude. They'd been with him for 3 days and they were hungry, and in Mark 8, Jesus fed them. Another time, blind men pleaded with Jesus to heal them, Matthew chapter 20, and Jesus did just that. Another time, a leper came to Jesus begging to be healed, and in Mark 1, Jesus healed him. And then in Luke chapter 7, when Jesus saw the widow of Nain, who had lost her only son, he comforted her and he raised her son. Every time that we've just mentioned, in each of these instances, Jesus was moved with compassion. He was moved to take action to help. How can we apply what we learned from Jesus? When you see someone who has spiritual or physical needs, do you feel compassion for them? When Jesus was moved with compassion, he took action to help. Do we fool ourselves into thinking that we are compassionate, but then we never act to help other people? 1 John 3, verse 17 through 18 says, "But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth." The Good Samaritan had compassion, and he stopped to help, even though it cost him something. What about us? Will we stop to help someone even if it costs us time, money, or maybe even sleep? God commands Christians to have compassion for each other. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 and verse 9, the text says, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers. Be tenderhearted. Be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing." 1 Peter 3, verse 8 through verse 9. There are several ways in which we can learn from the Lord's compassion that he had for others. The second emotion that we'll think about is sorrow or grief. As we read the gospel accounts, we find several examples of Jesus experiencing sorrow or grief. When he comes to the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew 26 and Mark 14 and Luke 22, Jesus experiences great sorrow there. When the Pharisees sought a sign to test Jesus, the text says that he sighed deeply with grief in Mark chapter 8. Another time in John 11, when Jesus saw Mary weeping over the death of Lazarus, he was moved with sorrow. And then in John 13, when he told the apostles that one of them would betray him, the text says that he was troubled in spirit. He was moved with grief, with sorrow. John 13, verse 21. When Jesus saw people's unbelief, it caused him great sorrow. When people reject Christ, does it cause us sorrow? Knowing the eternal home of the unbeliever should concern us and move us into action to help. Revelation 21:8 says, "But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." What about the suffering of Jesus? Does it cause you grief? It caused Jesus to sorrow, knowing what he would suffer for us. Knowing that he suffered and died for us and in our place should motivate us to live for him. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says of Jesus, God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. What about the sorrow of others? Does it cause us to grieve, to feel grief? Jesus wept when he saw the anguish of others. We are commanded in Romans 12, verse 15, to rejoice with those who rejoice and to weep with those who weep. When we think about our emotions, we think about Jesus and how he dealt with the emotion of sorrow, of grief. And then finally, the last emotion of our Lord that we'll think about is anger. Do you know that there are only 2 times in the gospel accounts where Jesus is specifically recorded as being angry? When I was writing this and when I was putting this together, I honestly thought that there would probably be more instances. But as far as Jesus specifically being recorded as being angry, there are 2 times that it's mentioned. First of all, in Mark 3, verse 1 through 5, Jesus was grieved and angry because of the hardness of the religious leaders' hearts concerning his healing on the Sabbath day. That was instance number 1. Number 2, Jesus was very displeased. He was angry when he saw his disciples rebuking those who wanted to bring their children to Jesus in Mark 10, verse 13 through 14. So what about us? Do we get angry quickly? The Bible teaches that a Christian must be slow to get angry. James 1, 19 through 20 says, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God." James 1, verse 19 through 20. Maybe we struggle with getting angry about the wrong things, about things that just don't matter. Significantly, Jesus is mentioned as being angry only, remember, twice in the gospel accounts. As Christians, we are told to be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Ephesians 4, 26 through 27. Is anger the motivating factor behind trying to teach other people? It's interesting that Jesus is never mentioned as being angry when he tried to teach the Pharisees and the scribes, even though they often tried to trip him up and to trap him, to ensnare him in his words. Even though they're constantly trying to trip him up, Jesus is never mentioned as becoming angry in his teaching toward them. Jesus never became angry because his audience didn't understand him the first time that he taught something. In fact, Jesus often repeated his teaching even to the 12 apostles who were with him constantly. Jesus responded emotionally with compassion, with sorrow, and anger, and he did all of it without sinning. He is our perfect example, 1 Peter 2:21. He is the one that we must imitate, including how we respond emotionally to the things that come up in our life every day. So let's strive to become more like our Lord every day of our lives, including how we respond emotionally. I appreciate you watching and listening to yet another video centered on Christ.
Centered on Christ is emailed as an article 5 days a week. Click the link in the description if you want to start receiving Centered on Christ to help with your daily Bible study.